In the Emerald Isle, something unexplainable is happening. Tonight, prepare to witness the most frightening event in horror podcast history. A journey into the depths of horror history. First Class Horror presents the Class Horror Cast. Evil wears many masks, but pure horror wears only one. Support First Class Horror on Patreon for as little as $1. Can't get enough of the horror? Carve yourself a deal from official merchandise, only on Teespring. Join us on all social media at First Class Horror. We have such sights to show you.
Writer-director Mark Sheridan is known for his brave ideas and strong visual sense. He started making short films in 2006 and then went on to direct his first feature-length film, Crone Wood, which is a truly fantastic film footage movie. Crone Wood blends a great and grounded story with likeable characters and a believable dialogue. You get an extreme sense of dread from the get-go, and the story pays off in a unique and exciting way. Crone Wood is available on Amazon Prime, iTunes and YouTube in most regions, while the Blu-ray is available through Amazon.com. It's finally getting its long-awaited UK and Irish release on February 1st in Tesco and Asda and on most streaming platforms. Mark is very knowledgeable in the filmmaking industry and has a real flair for horror. We got into some great topics from following your dreams to guilty pleasure horror movies and what lies behind his love for the genre. There are some great lessons from Mark, and I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. So Mark, thanks for joining me. So first thing I like to do is, first thing to get out of the way is any plugs or where people can find you online.
Where people can find me online. I guess we have blacklodgefilms.com where there's some information on projects, but probably, I guess the best place is either the Crone Wood page on Facebook or you'll find me personally at Black Lodge Films on Instagram. I used to be on Twitter a fair bit, but just lately I just kind of pulled away. Yeah,
I see a lot of people saying that. All the links will be down below anyway, so wherever anyone's listening to this, all the links for Mark's stuff will be down below. Okay, so let's jump into it then. Can you remember the first horror movie you saw, or maybe the first experience that started your love for the genre?
Yeah, it's a real weird one because I think like most people who are crazy big horror film fans, it kind of usually starts in those teenage years. And I'm not totally sure exactly which was that first one that I saw. I know I kind of grew up in an age where it wasn't, the internet or being able to stream stuff, and it was more what was going to be on late night television. And so I think Channel 4 and their strange kind of horror seasons were really what grabbed me and exposed me to stuff that I probably shouldn't have seen. I know very, very early ones that I would have seen, I guess. Obviously, you had things like Chainsaw Massacre and Hellraiser, but at the same time would have been also, I don't know, I'm trying to think when Ring came out, the Japanese Ringu, but that kind of stuff really, for modern stuff at the time, was really what grabbed me, and actually at the time really scared me. I find them, relatively tame nowadays, but at the time that really got under my skin.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, especially from over this side of the world, probably had a similar experience with things like Channel 4 and stuff.
Absolutely. That film, that introduced me to the film Zoltan, Hound of Dracula, which is still one of my favorite and is definitely the best film about Dracula's dog ever made.
So growing up, were you a collector? Did you collect movies or toys or anything like that?
Yeah, I think my shelves have been like from video to DVD and now Blu-ray. I keep swearing I'm not going to keep doing it, and yet there's some kind of a strange compulsion with it. And I think it's for anyone who loves cinema, but I definitely think horror fans, there's this desire to have things and to have access to it. And it's kind of weird because the days of sort of sharing things have sort of reduced because you can get access to so much online. But it used to be so exciting to say, like, I have the uncut copy of Cannibal Holocaust. Yeah. Have you seen it? You know, you can't get this anywhere else. I remember getting the Child's Play DVDs when they weren't available over here. And they sort of felt like this forbidden gold. And maybe that was part of the appeal as well. But yeah, I've always had a massive collection. I think at its height, it was around 900 DVDs, and I think now it's down to about 600 Blu-rays and DVDs. But as much as I try to get rid of them, I seem to keep adding.
Wow. Yeah, I have a similar thing with. I actually recently got back into VHS tapes again, and like I just think of all the stuff. Like I think we probably chucked everything. I don't even think we were smart enough to try and keep it and sell it or whatever. It was just given away.
Well, you couldn't sell it. Like I tried with my VHS collection, and like even charity shops wouldn't take it at the time. Even given some of the DVDs I was getting rid of, you can't get people to take it now, which kind of breaks my heart because you're like, these are good films, and I know someone would like to watch them.
Yeah,
and some of it you can't. The ones I've kept are the ones you can't actually get either on streaming or Blu-ray yet because you know not everything makes that transfer. And even with VHS, it's kind of funny because I know there's an element of nostalgia to it, but for certain things, you know, that grunginess that came with the video. That's what we connected with in when we first saw the film. I'm not sure modern day audiences would, but that is what you remember. Like your copy of Evil Dead 2 with all that kind of grit and grime with it. It kind of seemed fitting, you know?
Yeah, 100%. And like I just think of so many, and I do think you're definitely right in the sense that especially horror fans seem to have this thing with collecting, whether it's movies or any kind of merchandise or
you want to be surrounded by it.
Yeah, and like I talk to so many people now that kind of seem to go back and now you pay like 10 times the odds of stuff that you probably owned like 20 years ago.
Oh, I know. And John, like I have stuff I even haven't got put up yet. Like I have a signed poster from Halloween 4 with her name skips my mind now. The girl who plays Jamie in Halloween 4. And yes, when she was over at the Hearthon a couple of years ago. And like, you know, I love that film and I love that poster, and yet it's just so much stuff, but I needed to have it. I know I needed to have it. I'm glad I have it here.
Yeah, and I've kind of flip-flopped as well over the years. Like there's been times where I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to completely downsize and get rid of 90% of this stuff and keep a few things that I really, really am into.
Yeah.
And then I sit down then and I'm like, wait a second. I spent like 10, 15 years trying to amass this stuff, and now I'm just going to like get rid of it.
But it's so hard to get rid of stuff as well, because you look at the collection and obviously there's ones that are you're like straight up, okay, I think these are the greatest horror films of all time. But then there's those days when you're just tired or you just want something different, and there's these kind of oddities that you want there that no, it's not the greatest film. And yet I find myself going back and watching them maybe more often than I'd watch some of the films that I know are technically better films. Maybe that's because we've watched our favorites so many times. But yeah,
I definitely feel that. Do you were you a video store guy then growing up?
I was Extravision loud and proud for I think nearly 3 years before and during college, and you know that was such an amazing time because that was literally as they were switching over from VHS to DVD, and it was mad. It was for getting that kind of access to being able to just rent massive amounts of DVDs, because at that stage I would just sit and watch kind of anything. I still kind of the same. Horror was always my main one, but like cinema in general. And it kind of broke my heart because I remember as Extravision was coming towards the end, like their back catalogue, which is what, like 90% of the DVDs in there, we're only renting about 3%, and 97% were just those new releases that came out. People weren't discovering these films. I hope that's a bit different with streaming now. I'm not sure. You've access to everything, but whether people are giving stuff a go, I don't know.
Yeah, and I only spoke with someone like a week or two ago about this, and I don't know if I'd stand behind it 100%, but I don't know, like we talked about the streaming versus like the actual experience of going into a brick and mortar and having to kind of curate your own, maybe based off of just cover art alone.
But it was an event, wasn't it? It was a thing. You know, I stood there for far too long.
Yeah.
And you're right, it is, because like that's actually, when you're asking about like early horror experiences, there, I guess you could really trace it back to me being a kid, even of like, I was probably between 6 and 10 when video stores sort of appeared in my local area. And it was actually standing looking at that horror section, or sometimes just kind of walking by it and not being allowed to stop because that would look inappropriate, and seeing this image of Pinhead, seeing these strange images, and they frightened me, and that's what drew me to it, this wondering of, oh my God, what is going on in that film? Like even Hellraiser, just that tagline of "it'll tear your soul apart," you're like, that's a pretty bold statement. you know? And so I think there was always this desire to, I guess, confront that fear and just try and see how much can I handle.
Yeah. And like yourself, I hope that people do check out more. I kind of feel like I do in a way, but again, I feel like there's just things now, a lot of people get what would you call it? Choice paralysis, maybe. You've got so many apps absolutely. And so many different things. You've got Shudder and Netflix and all these different places that, and even I find sometimes, kind of like what you're saying, I've got maybe over all the apps, I might have 100 movies that I'm like, right, okay, I'm going to go through these in sequence or whatever. And then I pick out some random like urban legend from 1998 or whatever, and I watch that for the 500th time.
No, I know, and you do definitely get that, and I think there's an element as well, particularly with horror, that if we're honest, there's a bunch of it isn't great.
Yeah,
and that's kind of sad because, like, I think with horror fans, we are always wanting to love films. Like that's why we watch these things, and yet I want to see kind of everything I can get my hands on, and yet because I've got a young kid and everything here, I've had to start being a bit more specific with what I watch because you can only watch so many films where. Especially nowadays, and I guess Crone Wood falls into that remit of it's easier to make a film, it's easier to get a film out there, which is great news. But because of it, there's a vast quantity of stuff. And what we kind of need is people like yourself who can kind of suggest to people, because not everyone is going to be like us and they're going to trawl through Amazon Prime or Netflix's back catalogue trying to pick out ones that may be worth watching, maybe not. And if people get burnt a couple of times, they're not going to watch again.
Yeah, definitely. And especially like, I guess maybe a more mainstream person who is probably open to horror, but not actively seeking out all these little things. And it's exactly those people, I think that...
Well, yourself, like when someone comes to you and says, hey, like, I loved, let's even say maybe some newer films that we may not love, or say even me, because I'm a fan generally of Blumhouse, but they've made some pretty generic stuff. They've sort of trailed off in their quality for me. And so if someone tells me that actually, hey, I loved Annabelle, like, I wouldn't want to jump down their throat and say, I think that's a terrible film. But what I would say is, hey, if you like that, here's a couple of films you might actually like checking out, and trying to turn it into kind of a positive experience. I'm a big believer in that because there's a tendency to, again, kind of mock people who like current films. But then I know it was the same when I was loving films, when I was kind of going to college, say things like Wrong Turn and Cabin Fever were coming out, and they got trashed by a lot of people as sort of, horror fodder, and they kind of were, but I had fun with them, and I don't think you should apologize for that. If you enjoy those films, then good for you.
Yeah, there's definitely I do think for the most part, a lot of like maybe deep horror fans, you can, and maybe in a way being a horror fan or being so into it, you kind of have to already have that be willing to let a lot of things go that you mightn't with some sort of a Oscar winning.
Absolutely.
You've kind of already got to go in. Like, I mean, I'm wearing a Halloween.
I was going to say you're wearing a Halloween Resurrection t-shirt, and I support you for
and like
that.
I get a lot of, and again, it's like you said, and I don't think I've ever heard anyone put it so simply, but it is a case of like, I accept that it's not a good movie, but it just has one of those things that I like going back, and I thought it was a kind of an interesting approach to take, and yeah, it's cheesy and there's some awful scenes and choices and stuff, but it's just fun.
But see, that's like franchises fascinate me particularly because I'm drawn back to the sequels of the Friday the 13th, the Halloweens, the Child's Plays. Less so Hellraiser because I'm working my way through them again at the moment, and there's a lot of pretty poor ones in that. But like, yeah, I kind of feel with those, it's all been sort of done. So I sort of want them to have their new take on it. Now, whether it's fully successful or not doesn't really matter, but they can't remake Halloween again. It just doesn't work. So, give me something a bit fun. I know a lot of people didn't like Resurrection. I think there is many flaws in it, but I think the opening sequence is great.
So good.
And I love their explanation of how we're carrying on after H2O. I think that's one of the most inventive returns of a killer ever. And you've got to enjoy it for what that is. Do you know what I mean? Because I don't think people are anywhere near as hard on the Friday the 13th just because they came out in the 80s as opposed to the 2000s. It's the same thing.
Yeah, I always felt like, because I love that opening scene for Resurrection. I don't know why I have a really soft spot for that, and it just feels so... it just gets that kind of 90s, early 2000s feel. And I was like, if there was, because I love H2O as well. And I was like, if somehow someone could put that opening scene somehow into H2O and make it like
I think H2O was one of the best sequels as far as keeping, like, okay, I love 4, but I think if you look at 1, 2 and H2O, that's really more the natural story. And as controversial as it may seem, I think H2O did a much better job than the latest Halloween. I don't know. I felt the Laurie Strode in H2O was much closer to what I think the damaged individual will be like, as opposed to the kind of jittery, crazy woman that we saw in the latest version.
I've heard that a lot, actually, funny.
Yeah?
And one of the big gripes that I feel like I love the Halloween franchise so much, I'll kind of take anything. Just to see Michael again and see what the new take is or whatever. But I just, there was one thing in particular that and I don't know if it's a common complaint, but the whole thing with the doctor and the scene where he puts the mask on and stuff.
Yes. That's where they've fully lost me with it.
Yeah.
I went in, and maybe I went in with high expectations because they were hyping it up nice and good, and having Carpenter back with the music felt great. But the humor didn't quite work for me, but particularly that scene felt to me like you guys, well, maybe whatever their appreciation of Halloween is, it's not what I loved about Halloween. Do you know what I mean? And so again, I'm not hating on anyone, like, good for them. They can do whatever they want with the films. I'd rather they do their own take, but for me, I was like, that's just not the Michael Myers kind of vibe that I love.
Yeah, 100%. And like, I'm interested to see what's going to come next.
Me too. I'm not a huge fan of the titles, kind of like Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends. I not that Halloween 8 sounds, or 12 or whatever we're on now, sounds perfect, but yeah, I don't know. I will always end up watching them.
Yeah.
But I'm glad they've brought back some of, the darkness, but I don't know. It's weird because I love films as hardcore as they want to get, but there was something strange about the kind of brutality in Halloween, the latest one. What is in there? It was just called Halloween, wasn't it?
Yeah. Halloween.
Yeah. For me, Michael Myers in the original Halloween is so chilling because it's not even really brutal. It's just so emotionless. That's what scares me. He's just so passive. While in this one, it's kind of closer to what Zombie did. And even though Zombie's film gets so much hate, and yet they seem to kind of praise Blumhouse for bringing back that level of violence. So I'm not quite sure. I think Zombie got a bit of a hard ride on that. But,
Yeah, and he comes up a lot, actually, in the Halloween conversation. And it seems to be very divided. Like, people absolutely hate it and just despise his
like
take.
all Rob Zombie films. Yeah.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, which is kind of, and I can appreciate that. And I think that's why I wouldn't say I love his movies, like his Halloween takes.
Yeah.
But I do have a little bit of a soft spot for him. And I kind of appreciate that he, as much as humanly possible, he tries to, oh no, this is going to be Rob Zombie's Halloween.
Yeah, exactly. In the same way that John Carpenter films were very much John Carpenter. Like, that's their take on it. And like, I don't know what you expected from a Rob Zombie version of Halloween. And maybe people weren't familiar with him and his music and his other films, but like, I don't know. I think Rob Zombie, I have no problem with people hating his films, and I have no problem with people loving them. I quite like a good chunk of them. I think his last couple have been fairly weak, but I thought Lords of Salem actually had a lot of promise. And I just, like, the ending doesn't deliver, but I feel the fact that got such bad kind of a reception that since then he's sort of just jumped off the deep end and is just kind of saying, okay, well, fine, I'll give the fans what I think they want, as opposed to him just making what he cares about. And you kind of feel it in the films. They're a bit more, I don't know, cut and paste. But I know some people who love Three from Hell as well, each their own.
Yeah, like, it was okay, but coming from somebody who's like such a big fan of like House of a Thousand Corpses and stuff, it just feels like, because even to this day people are like, I get people to go, why do you like that movie? Or I don't even understand. I'm like, that's kind of why. I still kind of really don't get it in parts. I'm like, wait, what?
But that's like, I remember it was the Horathon showed it there, so it was the only cinema screening I think it got in Ireland, and we all went in with this excitement of wondering, what is this? And I don't know, it was just that, balls to the wall, colour and mayhem that I just had a great time with. And sure, the plot isn't brilliant or anything, but like, I kind of think you have to judge a horror film based on just the experience you have with it. And because if you're going to go after plots, there's so many of my favourite ones, including a lot of Argento films, that you just couldn't praise at all. But I like them, same with Lynch films, really.
Yeah, and that's that thing. I think if you're really hardcore about the genre, you kind of already know all that. There's a lot of things that and I feel like the community as well, it's maybe movie lovers in general or other, comedy, people who are super into comedies or action or whatever, there's maybe not that same level of, you've kind of got to suspend your belief a little bit more and kind of, at the end of the day, it is a horror movie. It's about, whatever, a guy who wears a mask and overalls and.
Yeah, but one thing Zombie does that actually I think is really missing in a lot of modern horror is just that sense of visuals. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe you could argue that there's too much visuals and not enough other stuff, and that's a fair question you could bring up. But I don't know, a lot of the, let's call it the A24 type modern horror, where it's the sort of art housey horror, I feel they're almost kind of apologetic to be horror films sometimes, and that kind of breaks my heart because I love Cronenberg, I love. God, I don't know how many great directors from the 80s who were able to have, say, an artistic or a deep, meaningful kind of film about stuff, but also still engage in that horror element. While nowadays, it almost feels a little bit tucked off to the side, which I think is a bit sad. I don't think you should ever be ashamed to be a horror film fan. And especially nowadays, I think that's changed, especially with the popularity of things like Walking Dead and just how even the Haunting of Hill House on Netflix, horror has become so mainstream, and yet still there seems to be this some kind of stigma about, oh, you like horror films, what kind of a person are you? And you're like, the vast majority of Americans were sitting down every week to watch The Walking Dead with heads exploding everywhere. What are you talking about?
Yeah, it's funny. It's like, I feel like the people who have been horror fans for the entire time still kind of get that. But then if you're just some, whatever regular guy who, oh, did you check out that Haunting of Hill House on Netflix? It's like, oh yeah, it's good, it's cool. It's like, or The Walking Dead, for example. It's it's like a water cooler conversation, but I'm like, well, it's horror and it's mainstream.
I guess it's tough because I guess this genre is one of those ones where I kind of embrace all elements of it, but people are still, they have an image of a certain type of thing when it comes to a horror film. In the same way when you're talking about even music, to people who don't listen to metal music, if you talk about bands like Metallica, they kind of think this is crazy rage stuff, and then you play some metallic music and they're like, oh right, okay, that's nothing like what I thought it would be. There's just the assumption that it was screaming death metal, and you're like, no, there's shades of grey. You know.
So when did you decide that you wanted to venture into film or that industry? When did that start to become?
I always wanted to be involved in film. I guess, it probably was when DVD really came out and you got all these extra features and it gave you a chance to see behind the scenes, and you sort of realized, you know what, I could do this, particularly what kind of maybe smaller films, ones that weren't as huge, and hearing some of the more honest directors' commentaries back when you used to have making of features that actually had real footage of it, not just promotional propaganda stuff. And then, watching the stuff like the early Raimi films, the early Jackson films, and kind of going like, God, these guys just went out there and did something. And obviously with Crone Wood, Blair Witch is a huge influence. And that came out, I guess, was around 1999, 1998, somewhere in there. That would have been, I was probably about 16 at the time. And just again, seeing that someone just went out there and made the film, it kind of blew me away. It was just that, let's not just sit around and wait for a perfect scenario, because it's very, very hard to get that. I just kind of thought, you know what, this is something I'm going to do. And I worked away in film for years, making short films. I've edited a short film for Juanita Wilson, who's an Oscar-nominated director. And, you could only get so far. And I came close to getting funding a number of times on a couple of projects, and it just didn't happen to work out. And I kind of realized I was getting a bit older, and I was getting towards probably getting married, and I just knew if I didn't take the jump now, it may never happen. And so it was sort of let's figure out what we can do. And also working with the years of experience I had to kind of say, I know what I can squeeze out of this. I wouldn't advise everyone makes a film like the way we did. If you didn't have the experience we had, like the amount of experience behind the camera that we had, I'm not sure you could do it. A lot of people on our set didn't think we could do it. But and for that reason, I would say to everyone as well, don't wait for that perfect moment. If you are considering doing something like this, go out and do it. Really, it's the only way this stuff will happen. In fact, I wish I did it 10 years earlier. Yeah,
I'm a super, Blair Witch is probably in my top 3 favorite movies of all time. And I actually had the opportunity to talk to Eduardo Sanchez about a year ago. And it was just super interesting to find out a lot of how that all came about and just the ideas. And like you said, the fact that they just went straight out and let's just do it. Let's just figure it out as we go and see what happens. And that's why I was kind of interested to, because I had actually taken some notes about Crone Wood, and that's kind of why I wanted to get into it.
Yeah, cool. Do.
I had written down at one point equal parts Blair Witch, Wicker Man, and Kill List.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. I'd probably lean even further on Blair Witch and Wicker Man, but there's no doubt Kill List had some sort of effect. Like Ben Wheatley had, again, he's just one of those people that really proved get out there and just make films. And I was part of the Directors Guild in Ireland, and we had Ben Wheatley over a couple of years ago to talk, and just his honesty and openness about just make the fucking movie and not being intimidated by other people and their rules. It really inspiring, especially because he's a guy who can shift from budget films to just making a film in a field in a couple of weeks. And, I really think that's the right attitude.
Yeah. And just with with Crone Wood, with your movie, I feel like there was a really good, and that's what it reminded me of. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way when I say comparisons to Blair Witch, because it is definitely its own thing, but it made me feel kind of the way I did with Blair Witch, where there was a good introduction at the start of the characters, and just the whole setting. You kind of it gave you just enough to actually care about what was happening.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know what? Like, never worry about hurting my feelings with these things, because actually, I think the film is exactly what it is, and I think probe away in any way. I won't be fragile about it. I never get why people are. I think you're absolutely right. And Blair Witch, the reason I would say that was such a strong influence, forgetting the fact that it's a found footage film, was that's one of the few ones, and I've watched nearly all the ones I could get my hands on in that kind of subgenre. It's one of the few ones that did actually allow for the characters to be part of it, and believable characters. I know not everyone loves Blair Witch, but that's something that always struck me back then, and why I was so frightened when I first saw that was because it felt real enough. And a lot of the more modern found footage thing has really jettisoned any sense of just that sort of what real captured footage might look or feel like, and how people talk to each other in real life, or what a kind of off-the-cuff comment would sound like. It's so overly scripted, because Crone Wood was written to sound kind of improvised, but really I would say 80% of that was word for word what was on the page. And then the rest was working with my two leads to bring it to life. But it was written very specifically to try and sound like how actual people talk and not film dialogue.
Yeah, and I definitely do feel that. Like, I'm a huge film footage guy, and I will watch. Again, it's the same horror kind of thing. I'll watch them and I'll suspend the fact that, okay, that doesn't really feel natural. And it felt like for a long time there, and that's why I was really surprised with the movie, that because there had been so many of those found footage kind of movies, and for you to do what you done after all that time and kind of, I don't want to say reinvent, but it exactly like you said, it didn't feel like I'm supposed to be watching something that has happened and I'm watching footage of it. It didn't have that kind of generic maybe Hollywood style lines, but just with a found footage filter over it. I was like, oh yeah, it's found footage.
Yeah, something they sort of added after the fact. And it was written with that in mind. So all the scenes were constructed. And I have to, for anyone who thinks, well, actually, no, it's probably a fair complaint about found footage. A bunch of them do look like lads just went out into the woods with no idea what they were doing and just improvised the whole thing and thought it would turn out good. Now, Blair Witch did that a little bit, but they were lucky as well. And there was a load of stuff that Blair Witch cut out that made their film better. But yeah, you really have to plot it. And actually writing these things, it's surprisingly tricky, because when you actually try to craft any sort of a scene that has suspense or tension, it's very difficult with only one angle that you have to kind of justify at all times. And of course, you're always going to be stretching the, belief system that someone's going to keep picking up that camera or keep pointing it. So I was always trying to work as much as humanly possible to give some form of justification to try and keep that going, because and to not break the rules, to not have these alternate cameras, because a lot of them bring in later on, it's like, oh, there's security footage here, or someone uses a phone there. I wanted to try and keep it as pure as possible, because I think that's why Blair Witch worked, or even Willow Creek is another quite successful found footage one that I think worked as well. It was true to the genre, it didn't mess with it just worked within it.
And I always understand when I see, sometimes it bothers me when I see reviews for movies in that subgenre and people are like, oh yeah, but I would have just put the camera down and ran away, or I would have whatever. And it's like, yeah, but that would have been the end of the movie. So going in, we've got to suspend that belief a little bit, but there's definitely something to be said for having, as much as you possibly can, justifiable reasons for it still to continue.
Well, you have to respect your audience, you know, like, of course you're asking them to suspend disbelief to a certain extent, but you can't do it to the point where you're going to annoy them. Especially for me, I think found footage particularly only works if you have some connection to those characters and it feels at least somewhat real. Like, I think that's why found footage can be quite scary, is that sense of this feels just like, what if I was there? It's easier to put yourself in that reality than if we're watching people in a mansion in a haunted house. You're like, I probably wouldn't be there. But in a found footage scenario, depending on the film, you can kind of go, crap, like maybe what if that did happen to me? Like what in Wreck? What if I was in that apartment building? How would I cope?
Yeah, that's true. I was just looking there and like there was a couple of jump scares that actually, and it doesn't happen too often to me anymore, but there was a couple of scares there that actually got me. And I'm really glad. I couldn't help but feel just a sense of dread after the first couple of minutes, maybe. Just like this building sense of, and I think it kind of ties into what you say in the sense of maybe dragging the audience into, oh well, I wouldn't be in Dracula's castle, and whatever. I was like, and I didn't even realize it was happening, but I kind of felt drawn into it a bit, like, oh well, how
I'm really glad that works. Like, that was really important to me because, again, with found footage, I thought it was important to not break that rule of adding a soundtrack, because a bunch of them do nowadays. But for me, what was scary was this sort of just normal background sound. But we did work really, really hard to even think of what sort of background noises were you going to have going along. Like, even just, I don't know, it's even the sound of the cars they're traveling there, just even seeing it moving, we can feel ourselves being pulled towards something. And the fact that there isn't like this big setup piece, there's no kind of this is definitely what's going to happen telegraphing ahead, it creates this wonder. You know they're going into the woods, you know something bad is going to happen, but I feel in Crone Wood particularly, up until the points where stuff starts happening, you're not really quite sure what's going to happen or on what level it's going to be. And I think that's kind of nice because we get so used to watching like kind of cookie cutter horror films and I kind of love those films, but you know exactly where you're at from the first 2 minutes. Do you know what I mean? You know that 10 minutes is going to happen and that person's going to, and I bet you that guy's the killer because he looks shifty. So it's nice sometimes to be able to say, hey, just go along for the ride and I hope you enjoy the film, you know?
And how big of a part, when you had kind of come up with all this idea, how big of a part was the location?
The location was, well, what I was doing when I was trying to write Crone Wood was, it was a walk that I took with one of my best friends, and we went up to Hellfire Club and we were just chatting, and I was talking about kind of what I could imagine would be out there in the woods, and she was just getting properly freaked out, and we brought her dogs up there, and the dogs refused to go into the Hellfire, and one of them like literally threw a freak out attack, and it just kind of gave you this sense of an area. And so it got me thinking about what locations would I potentially be able to get access to that would really boost the production value, you know? And the Hellfire Club up Montpellier Hill and Massey's Woods across the side of the road had these beautiful ruins in there, and you just realize that that's what I'm looking for when I'm watching a kind of a found footage film or something. It's something I haven't seen before or I may not know. And you know, older buildings, there's just a sense of history there that you can't even get, even if you had the budget to build things. You know, there's just something real, and we know it's real. And even the decay around it, the way it's crumbled, the way the holes have formed in the walls, something in our brain knows that that's an actual place. And so when I knew I could have them, and we spoke to the Quilta who were in charge of managing those lands, and we were able to get access to them, that's when I knew we could definitely do a film, because we were going to be so limited on so many different things. I just felt you got to have those payoff moments where you see something substantial.
Yeah. And for people who don't know, if you could sum up what the Hellfire Club is.
Yeah, the Hellfire Club's interesting. There's Hellfire Clubs across the world, but and I'm sure some fans will probably shoot me for oversimplifying it, but the one in Dublin certainly is famous for, supposedly legendary goes that it was built up on this hill that overlooks Dublin, and I guess you could call them Satan worshippers used to go up there, and you know, the truth is more kind of probably a bunch of whores and rich businessmen, but the idea was that they had a big long table there, and the head of the table was always left free for the devil if he ever came in, and one day a black cat came and sat in it, and that's what some people think was the devil was there. There's other people who, you know, the whole card game where people looked under the table and saw the hooves. It did have, was it a straw or a thatch roof that kept burnt down a couple of times, and that's supposedly why it's got its stone roof, which makes it quite strange. But when you go into the building nowadays, it has this incredible view out over the city, and it's ominous, it's dark. Even in the brightest part of the day when you go in, there is this strange feeling, and you just can't help but wonder what went on in here. It's quite powerful. Like I'd really, if you're in Dublin or you get a chance to visit, it's definitely worth a walk up the hill. Unfortunately, since we filmed there, a lot of those woods got cut down, so it's not quite as beautifully kind of hidden as it used to be. You used to have to kind of climb up through the trees, and now it's sort of a bit more exposed, but definitely worth visiting. And Massey's Woods across the road, because I think that's really, really interesting.
Yeah, like just from looking at the movie, and like I've kind of researched lightly before about all that stuff, and it definitely even nearly felt like maybe like a character in a way.
Oh, 100%.
Like, this is like
100%.
perfect. This setting is like, and again, not to tie it back, but that whole feeling of like the Black Hills in Blair Witch and stuff, it had that feel. I was like, this is it doesn't just feel like you know, group of people or a couple or whatever go out to some random woods and, oh, what do you know, it's haunted or there's a thing going on.
Yeah.
There was actually it felt like there was something.
Yeah, but like that was really important to me, that it felt like there's enough here to feel that this is somewhat based in reality, or I don't know. Like I remember in, say, Blair Witch, the first time they come across is a Rustin Parr's house. Rustin Parr. I think like you see that house, like the cinema had like this intake of breath when that house turned up in the woods, because there's just, I don't know what it is about these isolated dark houses, but something in our inner fears just kind of goes, no good can come of being in there, you know. And the same again if you see Crone Wood, or if you get to see Massey's estate, when you get to see the ruins over there. I think it was a plantation house, I'm not sure. I don't know, there's a history there that you wanted to tap in, and what I wanted Crone Wood to be was to feel like a story that definitely could have existed there, to the point where, and we've had a few people get in touch actually who felt it was based somewhat on stories that were real, that I can assure people it's not quite true. But you know, when we screened it in Cork, a man came up to me afterwards and warned me off. He thought the film was very effective, but he was afraid that we were encouraging occult type behavior, and perhaps the film should be withdrawn. But we're not going to be doing that.
Did you have any scary experiences while filming on set or anything? Well,
we did, actually. And it's a funny one though, because like I kind of feel people always have their stories and stuff that where, you know, it's sort of bullshit. But no, we did, which was really strange, because we filmed it at Halloween. Oh wow! And and of course in the middle of the night at Halloween when you're up, it wasn't Halloween night when we were filming there. It was the day before and 2 days after. A bunch of other people were obviously going up to investigate the Hellfire Club as well, which is strange. But the first night we were out there filming, we were walking along and this Irish wolfhound came out of the woods, man. We were about halfway up and it literally came out of the dark. Just someone caught it on the torch and it walked beside us and followed us all the way up to the Hellfire Club, and it stood outside while we filmed. And like I've photos of it. It was so especially because the Irish wolfhound is so symbolic of Irish history as well. And it just disappeared back into the night, and that really got me. And there was another time when we were doing the recce, and I still, because like, if you ask me like logically, do I believe in ghosts or anything like that? No. Do I like the idea of them? Absolutely. And yeah, when we were going out, and it was in the middle of the day, I was doing a sound recce with the sound crew. We had a really talented bunch of guys, and we were just standing there, and they were just listening to things. And I swear to God that it was like something banged into me or through me. Now, it could have been just anxiety building up of what we were going to do, but I had this suddenly faint feeling and something that hit me really, really hard that made me feel so weird, just for like 3 or 4 seconds, and then it passed. And that was the closest I've ever felt to kind of going, that's really freaky. I think that could have been something. But that was before we shot. When we were shooting, I was far too stressed and busy to actually notice anything else. The other cast would probably be able to tell you stuff. I feel like it's scarier as well. And I know you're not saying it's not, maybe not out of your belief system altogether, but to be somebody, probably, I would consider myself quite similar. I don't necessarily logically believe in all that, but I think it nearly makes it scarier than when you do think you've had an experience. You're like, absolutely. I think, yeah, if you can get someone who doesn't believe in it to get frightened, well, then that's the really scary thing, because you're not looking for it, and so you're not keyed up for it. Definitely. And I can tell you, Hellfire is definitely creepy at night, but there's kind of the light off the city that helps a bit there. But across the road in Massey's Woods, when you're in the middle of the woods there in the middle of the night, like we were there at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, like I know that the woods pretty well. We got disorientated. It is so strange because it starts looking all the same with just torchlight. And we were walking around in circles, and it just, something inside you again just hits and realizes, I can see how people get lost. You know, people watch these films and kind of go, I wouldn't get lost. I just follow this, that, or the other. You lose your bearings really, really quickly. And the sound of the wind in the trees, it's louder than you think in the middle of the night when things are quiet. Definitely scary.
Yeah,
definitely.
And I definitely feel that when something like that happens, and I don't care if you're the most logical or outdoorsman or whatever, I do think that if you get caught in that and then start to panic, that definitely feeds into it even more, because a lot of your logic and quick thinking and calmness is gone. Absolutely.
No, there's no doubt. And that's, you know, it's so easy for people watching, particularly horror films, to kind of say, I'd never do this or that. But I think, and I see that labeled at Blair Witch quite a lot, and I think unfairly, because you're kind of going, bar maybe kicking the map away. You know, you don't know how you behave in these situations. You really, really don't. And it's an easy cop out to say, well, I'd just kick his head in. It's like, yeah, sure you would. You would. You know, like, I don't know. I think it's interesting.
Did, am I correct in saying this movie was shot over 5 days?
You are, yeah. Crone Wood, like, I've done a lot of stuff on varying budgets, from bigger budgets to smaller budgets, to no budget, which I guess you could probably call Blair Witch Crone Wood. We shot that whole film in under 5 days. It was a little over 4.5, which is kind of outrageous, and it was a really, really hard ordeal. It was probably the closest I ever pushed myself to breaking point, and even for the actors, it was a huge ask, because we had call sheets that were demanding, we were doing about 17 or 18 pages of a script a day. And because of the nature of found footage, they weren't all in one location. We were doing, 16 or 17 different spots in the woods. And that meant we really had to be very focused on what we were doing. Now, because I wrote it as well as directing it, at least I knew exactly what each scene had to achieve. So that was quicker. The actors were incredible with their dialogue, because they only had a couple of takes. But it really, really made it hard, especially for the more actiony bits, because there's a lot involved there. And because of found footage, you're trying to make it feel like it's sort of one take in some of those pieces. And sometimes it is one take, sometimes it's a few bits pieced together. But that was an endurance test. That really, really was.
Yeah, I definitely think that's a testament to your, like, I guess everything you're writing, you're directing, just bringing that whole thing together in even less than 5 days, in 4.5 days, to make a product like that at the end is a huge testament to you, and obviously the crew and stuff as well. But for you to have that, like you said, that exact vision of, okay, this is what this needs to do. We need this to be pinpoint.
Yeah, it's a funny one, like, because again, I'd never recommend people to do what I did. I recommend them to go out and make a film 100%, but part of the reason we were able to do this was because I had worked a lot as an editor. So I had a very strong understanding of how things would cut together. So I knew where I would be able to have cut points and stuff like that. So I didn't need to record extra footage. In fact, I think there's probably only maybe 1.5 scenes that we shot that didn't end up in the final film. Things were trimmed a little bit here or there, but by doing that, it was the only way we managed to get through this. If we were to do it like a traditional film to get coverage and get just a few different options, it never ever could have happened. So it's about using, I guess, every bit of experience you have. And, I put extra effort into getting, like, our sound team were these incredible bunch of guys. We had, like, you watch a found footage film and you think, well, it's just kind of a camcorder and that's it. And we did an expensive 4K camcorder, but it was a camcorder. But we had 4 sound men there recording things. We had radio mics. We had 2 mics on boom poles and everything, because for me, you've got to be able to hear the people. If there's nothing worse than a film with bad sound. So they were working incredibly well. And if you could see how hard it was for them not to cast shadows on the actors while they were trying to get their dialogue, it was it was really, really hard. But those are the things, if you're going to do it quick, you got to make sure you've got really good people, like good people in front and behind the camera, to make sure that at least if you get it right, that it is captured properly, because there's no going back. And the fear is, if you don't manage to get it, what do you do then? Because we only had so much money for so many days. And there's a lot of films out there that get half shot, that just never get out there. That's why I'm so proud of the fact that Crone Wood is so worldwide. It's amazing that it's gotten out there.
Yeah, so how was that then? When everything finished up and you had gotten edited and everything, and you had a finished movie, what happened from that point?
That was probably even harder in a way. It was more of the endurance test, because the great thing for the cast and crew, they put huge efforts in on the days, but then they're done and they get to walk away. And because in the nature of making a lower budget film, I was a co-producer along with my other producer, Tess, and so I was co-producer of that, obviously the writer, director, editor, and you've just got so many jobs to do. And I had to try and figure out how to sell this film, because again, a lot of films get made that you just never get to see. And for us, what that was, trying to get into festivals, but that's harder than you think. There's a lot of challenges with that. There's a certain element of politics in it as well. And it costs money to submit to all these festivals. Some people don't realize, like the bigger festivals out there, it can cost up to €100 to submit. And you'll go in with 1,000 other entries, and the odds of getting into a slot is pretty small. So what we did was, when we were doing the cast and crew in Cineworld in Dublin, I invited along the guys from Fantastic Films, who have done a lot of the Irish horror films. And they hadn't really touched on this kind of horror film before, but they know horror and they know how to sell stuff. And kindly, John McDonnell from Fantastic came along and watched the cast and crew screening. And he came up to me at the end and he said, I think we can sell this. I think we can do something with this. And that was probably the biggest relief I'd heard, because these guys know what they can do. And they were able to get us a sales agent. They came on board as executive producers, and they were able to get us a sales agent. And from there, they sold the rights worldwide. I think we sold to about 60 something territories around the world. And like the Ireland and England release is coming out now, but actually it got out in the rest of the world a couple of years ago. Ireland and England just happened to be technical reasons why it was harder. It was nothing particularly to do with the film, but it's been amazing. But the truth is, without someone like that, I'm not sure we would have gotten it out there. Like, there's horror stories out there of great people who've made good horror films, or certainly well watchable horror films, and they end up paying thousands of euros themselves to get the film out there. Like, you actually pay other people thousands of euros to put it up there, to get it released. I didn't have the money for that. Like, we broke the bank making it. So yeah, it's
cool that it has that kind of story in a way, because it was I suppose in a sense make or break, to hear you saying, like, marriage might have been on the horizon, and I need to get this going.
Very much so.
And to push yourself and the boundaries so much while getting everything together, to filming it, to then afterwards getting the movie made, essentially, to then to get a break like that, I guess, is just, it's a cool story and a kind of a journey too.
It is. And what I like to be is super honest about these things, because, people love to give you the easy side where, like, it was all just wonderful and great. But I think a lot of people go through really tough times, and like that end of things was probably a 2-year process for me. And at that stage, of course, you still haven't earned a penny off the film. Like, what we did with our budget, we paid everyone who worked on the film apart from me. So I'm the only person who got nothing from it. And so you're still putting another year of this in. You're trying to work a full-time job. Yeah, you're trying to work towards these things in life, and yet you have to pick yourself up in the evening and try and send out these emails and get people to watch things. It's really hard, and it's not part of the industry that most people get into film to do. There's a reason why kind of producers are good at that stuff. And I would say, if you're going to make a film yourself, try and find a producer who either has experience or has the energy to do that, so that you don't have to, because it's a totally different skill set. Yeah. And it's a bruising journey.
Yeah, I can only imagine. That kind of ties into a question that I had as regards maybe advice that you might give to somebody, especially, I suppose, maybe involved or wanting to follow something, whether it be making a horror movie, whether it's something like this, starting a podcast, or whatever, maybe in the horror genre, but just following a dream, maybe that's not your 9 to 5, or maybe something that a lot of people, because I think as a horror fan you get it anyway, but a lot of people kind of look at you and go, really, you want to do that? Or are you mad?
It's a funny one. You get the two sides. So people look at you kind of going like, you're crazy. And then there's the other side who kind of go, God, I'd love to just go and do something like that. And yeah, I don't know. What I would say is like, there's the sort of the two mindsets. There's the people who've these fixed mindsets where they're like, look, it'll be too hard, or what's the point? And then there's people who are willing to grow and change. And for me, with everything in life, and I think the only way you're going to manage to have any great achievements is being willing to put yourself out there and take the risk. That, you know, if you are waiting until you can make something perfect, and I mean this in any way in life, you're never going to get there. It's always going to be something you work at. And I have much more admiration for anyone who is willing to put themselves forward, whether it's making a podcast, whether it's a blog post, whether it's making a feature film, whatever it is, singing a song, but they're willing to upload it and make it public to other people to watch them. I think that takes huge courage. And I would have much more respect for someone who makes a not great film, who is willing to put it out there and share it with the world, than someone who sits on their couch and says, I would make a great film if I had X, Y, and Z. We'd probably all make a great film if we had X, Y, and Z. But I admire the people who go out and do things, you know, and I think that's really the thing. If you feel you've got that in the tank, and especially if you think you're going to look back and regret it later, go for it. You know, what's the worst that happens? Like, say, even with your podcast, like, if it becomes an amazing success, that's fantastic. If you decide to stop it after a couple of years, so what? You still did it. No one can ever take that away from you. And I feel that the same with Crone Wood, that, you know, like, I have the Blu-rays of that film sitting on my shelf. I've got the posters here, still waiting to be framed to put on the wall. But I got a little daughter here, and I'm very proud to be able to tell her that, you know, we went out there and we made that. We made that happen. We put it into existence. And not a lot of people can say that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's something that stops probably 99% of people. And not that I want to put maybe Ireland down, but there's definitely I definitely feel that Ireland has always struggled with that in a way. We kind of have a mentality of maybe in a way shitting on the guy who wants to do that. And I'm sure you've probably dealt with it, not that we have to get into it or anything, or maybe you don't even know, but there was probably plenty of people that were like, what a fucking idiot, or that's so sad, or that's just pathetic or stupid, or, oh, if I made that, I'd make, like you said, like the couch experts who just sit there and...
Absolutely. It's so easy to criticize things. And, do you know, ironically, the most I've heard now, of course, you know, every opinion's out there and it's the internet. So if you read the IMDb reviews, you'll see a few people who definitely didn't enjoy the film, but there's plenty of people who did. I find the largest attack I got actually was not the film, the story. It was just the fact that it was found footage. There's such a level of hate for this subgenre that, like, people are like, I think I really would have enjoyed it if you hadn't made it as found footage, which, like, to me, I want to say to them, there's like, but this could only be a found footage film. I don't, like, you know, if I was to ever do another one, I wouldn't make it as a found footage film, but I would write it very, very differently. There's a lot of people out there with opinions, especially in the internet. It's a dangerous area because you try not to read these things, but you can't not as well. The truth is, most people will never go on the internet to tell you what they thought of your film. Only people who either really loved it or really hated it, and people who hated it are going to be the first on there, you know. And it's not, you can't say that it doesn't hurt. Of course, it stings anytime you read those things. But then there's a lot of other people who I'd really value and respect, who've really liked it and supported the film. And that's, you know, that's what really kind of makes you realize that the general audience likes it. Like, there's no way, like, Tesco and Asda themselves are putting out, I think it's like 5,000 copies of this film. They wouldn't be doing that unless they thought there was a market there for it. Do you know what I mean?
100%.
And the only people who are going to go on and write the reviews are going to be maybe the 10 or 12 people who really didn't like it. And yet they're the ones who still jumped and bought it. So for me, I don't think you can ever ask people to love your film. All you can ask is for them to give you their time and to give it a chance. And if they didn't like it, that's absolutely their right. But it was not made with any kind of cynicism to piss them off, which I think some films are, you know, especially on lower budget as well. You see it sometimes where they have like kind of a cool cover that doesn't deliver at all on what the film is. We try not to do that, you know, and I've even tried to keep the marketing and everything reasonably, you know, reflective of the film, because that's what that's when I get annoyed, if someone hypes me up for something and it's just not that. You know, if you want a good film about, you know, a couple who go into the woods, and if you enjoyed either The Wicker Man or Blair Witch, or particularly both of them, like, I think you're going to enjoy this film. I think you are, you know, and yeah, it's a film with a story. But yeah, that, you know, haters are going to hate.
100%, and I agree with that. And coming from somebody, and like a lot of people who listen will know that I'm a huge found footage guy. I've seen some awful found footage movies. Coming from me, I would put this definitely in my top 5 found footage.
I really appreciate that.
And that's not just because we're talking, genuinely, and I find it really hard. I was like, I got so into found footage and seen so much that I think even sometimes there was like probably good movies there that just went over my head because I was like, I've seen this kind of thing again, and it's not really great. I can't differentiate it enough to feel anything about it.
Completely.
And
it's a funny one, like, because like that's if there was any particular flaw I'd be willing to accept from people was the fact that I made this film for people who, like me, I think enjoy found footage films. I was trying to make one of those kind of films that I would enjoy seeing.
Yeah.
You know, and I guess if you don't like that kind of film, then maybe you're not going to enjoy this. But I think even for people who aren't fans of found footage, if you come into it with an open mind, without, you know, kind of these assumptions, and watch the film for what it is, like, I think Elva and Eddie, who are my 2 leads in the film, like, their performances are great.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they are really, really strong. And when you look at a lot of lower budget films, usually the acting is one of the first things to suffer. I think what they do in this film is really what creates that connection to it and carries you through to the end of the film. I think you believe in, particularly Elva, when she's screaming at points. I bought it. It was pretty freaky in the woods.
Yeah, and like, again, kind of to tie back into, it's definitely a testament to your just the how the movie was written and directed and everything. And it's kind of tying back into what you said about putting yourself out there and stuff. I definitely agree with the fact that I do think putting yourself out there is definitely more important than quality. I've had that question asked a couple of times, or people will message me and go, "Oh, you're talking to X, Y, and Z." Ask them about, you know, is it about the equipment or is it about this? And like you said, a lot of people can sit back and say, well, if I had €5 million and I had all the top quality equipment, I would make X, Y, and Z. And it's like, okay, maybe you would, but I mean, at the end of the day, quality can be subjective as well.
Absolutely.
And like you said, you know, there's somebody who said, I would have preferred this movie if it wasn't found footage. And then I had the completely other side of it. And like I said, I would say it. And the reason that I had reached out to you was because the movie stuck with me.
I'm glad.
Like, I've watched probably hundreds of movies like that. I say like that, in that subgenre.
Absolutely,
and they just kind of, I don't really, whatever. It was just another movie. This had this weird, like I said, that sense of dread. I watched it 2 or 3 times and I was like, I keep getting this weird feeling. And even like with the Blair Witch, I watched that so many times, but I still can kind of get into it.
It still gets me. Blair Witch still gives me the creeps. Honestly, the especially that final scene when she goes down to the basement, like every time gives me those chills.
Yep.
There's something about it just in my head feels real, feels wrong. And absolutely, and if my film was able to do even a fraction of what that did feel, like, I genuinely delighted, because that is really all I wanted to deliver to fans out there and just viewers. Like, that's my big hope, would be that people will get to see this film and enjoy it, because it's so easy for it to not even have gotten this far. Mm-hmm. And I think people will enjoy it, you know, that if it can give just a few people that feeling, I would be just over the moon.
And so you said the movie is releasing in the UK and Ireland finally.
Yeah.
So where can people pick that up and when?
So in the UK and Ireland, it's 1st of February it's coming out. It's going to be available on DVD in Asda and Tesco. It'll be available to rent online in the Sky Store, in Amazon Prime, iTunes, of course. I think YouTube are going to have it as well.
Nice.
That'll be in HD, obviously, so it'll look better. Like, we shot this film in 4K. Unfortunately, it's not available in 4K yet. But you know, if you can, I think the HD is definitely nice. You can get it on Blu-ray if you order it off Amazon.com. I'm pretty sure. I think it's region free. Mm-hmm. I have to double check that. But yeah, you pretty much everywhere you'd find stuff, you will. And I would say definitely, like, take the time, sit down with a girlfriend, you know, and just enjoy a movie. It's 90 minutes. I'm a big believer in films that are not, like, you know, way too long, especially with horror. It's a tight 90 minutes of entertainment, and you get in, get out, and I really think you'll feel it was worth your while.
And I definitely agree with that in the sense that because sometimes I'll, especially now, there's so much stuff there and there's so much stuff I want to see and rewatch and whatever. And sometimes if I see a huge runtime, if I'm not completely like down with watching the movie, I'll be like, you know what, I'm going to pass on this again. And this really feels like, it's funny because it doesn't feel like 90 minutes, but it's a nice, it's a nice watch, but at no point did it feel rushed. Like the introduction and stuff, like I said earlier, I definitely felt like that I knew the characters and kind of cared what's going on or what's going to happen. And then that just kind of building of dread, but it didn't feel like, oh, look, we've got some people, blah, blah, blah. Crazy stuff is happening. We're running around throwing the camera everywhere.
Yeah, it's a trick because like it was really important, even developing the structure and the plot of the story, was to not have it become people's worst fear, where it's just going to be two people running around in the woods, shaking the camera, screaming, because that's what I think people think about with these kind of things. And our film definitely isn't that. I won't talk too much about why it isn't that because I don't want to give away kind of where the story goes. But it's constantly evolving, and that was really important to me, that we never really settle in one place for too long, and it's sort of like a roller coaster. You're along for the ride, and I'd love to think that the film ends before you've looked at your watch.
Oh, 100%. And I actually, just when you had mentioned the Blu-ray, that was something I was going to ask you, because I wasn't sure if they were releasing that here, because I had to use a VPN to get it on Amazon in the States.
Yeah.
And then I tried to use the same VPN to order from Amazon.com, but it didn't. I don't know, it wouldn't work anyway, and then I wasn't sure if it was region free.
Yeah, I have to check, because actually I still, the Blu-ray's down there on the shelf and I haven't plugged it in yet, so I'll have to double check that. I would love to think we get a Blu-ray release over here. I would say how well it does in streaming will kind of dictate that. Physical media is in serious trouble at the moment, and with COVID times it's even worse. So I don't know, but I believe I was told it was region free, but I will double check that before anyone buys it. But like, I think you can, if you just go straight to Amazon.com, even without a VPN, I think you can get it. Maybe you can't now. You certainly were able to before. And I think definitely, I'd say HD to check it out if you can.
Yeah. Okay. So few final questions then.
Sure. Go ahead.
If you could either write or direct, an entry in an existing horror franchise, what would you choose and why?
It's such a tough one, and I can't lie and say I haven't thought about it. It's a tricky one, because like my favorite franchise is probably Halloween, but I'm not sure that I have anything I could contribute to it that would be worthwhile. Do you know, like it's strange. I almost kind of wouldn't want to touch that just because I think you can't. I think the two that have the most potential for expanding it and doing something interesting would either be Chainsaw Massacre or Hellraiser, actually. Nice. Like for me with Chainsaw, and I wrote a very short treatment at the time where I thought like this could really happen before they started doing all the remakes. It was like the hunt for Leatherface. So that idea of like that after the very first film that they'd all just disappeared, and there's just that creepy house in a kind of suburban area, and a little kid is playing with his friend, and they kind of break into this strange house, and they go upstairs, and there's just this big hulk of a man sitting on the bed, and it's Leatherface. He's just been hiding, and when he sees the kid, it just clicks off something again, and it's sort of a cross-country hunt, but Leatherface on the run, and the danger of that, because Chainsaw was very contained, where you've got the family sort of in one spot, and it was more, how dangerous would someone like that be if they were frightened and panicked, and they were just rampaging through an area. And I loved the idea of that, having a very kind of tense, tight thriller. I thought you could do that in Hellraiser. Because the sequels are so disappointing, especially after the first three to that. There's just so much lore there. Like I kind of almost wish that Clive Barker had managed to come back and do his sort of, final piece to it in the way that Wes Craven got to do with A New Nightmare, to actually kind of cap it off. But I just feel there's something you could do in that world. Like give me a mental asylum with a bunch of inmates and let the Cenobites loose, and I'd watch.
Yeah, that's definitely, I love that idea about the Texas Chainsaw, and I just, until you were saying it there, I never really kind of thought about it that way, in the sense that it's always very contained, and they're
stuck in the house.
And like we always find that no matter whether they remade it or rebooted or whatever, it's always kind of we've got a group of people that are coming to him.
Yeah.
And, you know, whether
you've got to change it.
Yeah.
You've got to find a way to do something. Like it's so important with a franchise thing that you have to stay loyal to what the guys are about. So I wouldn't change anything about what Leatherface represents. But yeah, you change the context of the situation. Like, I think in a way you could argue that's the success of Devil's Rejects to House of Thousand Corpses, that you get to have these characters again who you're interested in, but in quite a different situation. And that's interesting. I think, especially if when you watch the first Chainsaw, like what works about Leatherface is he isn't kind of the kind of monster they tried to turn him into in later ones. Like, he's panicked, he's frightened, he's overexcited. There's a simplicity to him. That doesn't make him any less dangerous, but I think that makes him far more interesting. You know, like the bit where Leatherface is sort of dressed up in like woman's clothes and kind of housemaid clothes with more makeup at one point. Like there's more going on with Leatherface's psyche than you get to see. And there's a kind of a tragedy to that I'm interested in. In the same way, people, when they talk about Dracula, a lot of people are all like, oh yeah, but you know, the big house and he's terrifying. Dracula was always so sad to me because in those early chapters of the book and in some of the films, they slightly touch on it. There's a real hint when Jonathan Harker arrives in the house that, you know, and he kind of, all this food appears and this beautiful banquet is there. And it's kind of implied that Dracula himself put all this on just to try and impress that he still has this wonderful life that he doesn't have.
Yeah.
And I think there's something fascinating about these people we consider monsters who are actually desperate for a bit of love and attention underneath it all. You know, Frankenstein gets some of that, but Dracula doesn't get seen that way. So yeah, I think you got to have the bit of a tragedy to them. Not a backstory that justifies where they are where they are. I think that's best left alone. But there has to be this element of humanity. That's what makes it scarier, because what makes them real.
Yeah, and like even on the first Texas Chainsaw, like just that iconic scene that everybody remembers at the end, and just the way he's like flailing around with the chainsaw and stuff. There was something, I don't know why, even now still, something kind of like unsettling about that for me. I'm like,
it's powerful.
Yeah, he's like, because part of me feels like he's like, you know, kind of like a child.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, and he's like, in a way, he's like not in control of what's going on with him. And I don't know, that just made it scary to think.
No, but that's what it is. And you see, because actually, even in the end of Chainsaw 2, when Stretch swings her chainsaw around, and they've done it in one or two of the other ones where they try to emulate that moment, and it comes across as completely fake and staged.
Yeah.
It's just, there's something about how Tobe Hooper made that first film that has that raw verite feel. And I would compare it to sort of found footage in the way where it feels like we're sort of watching this unedited madness as opposed to a beautifully structured thing. The way he swings around, the sounds he's making, and that the whatever what you call it, the magic hour, it's beyond iconic.
Yeah.
And what an incredible moment to end on. That film gives you no break.
Yeah.
You know, like the whole tagline of who will survive and what will be left of them is such a perfect thing, because sure, Marilyn Burns survives at the end, but like she's destroyed. And I kind of think that's such a great analogy for all these challenges in life where people are like, oh, what doesn't kill you only makes you stronger. And you're like, well, surviving isn't always what it's cracked up to be. You know, the damage done is actually really important. Just because you made it through, it doesn't mean you're okay. And I think they're the best horror films, the ones that you get, there's hope at the end that there's a chance, but it's not perfect. Things aren't always going to be okay afterwards.
Yeah, it can't just be clear cut. Like, and clearly, just from that scene alone, she is not riding off into the sunset, smiling and everything is great. Oh, I've escaped. And just the fact that he's left back there. And I remember even now, like that still kind of sticks with me every time I watch that movie. It kind of gave me chills at the end, and you're kind of left with that image. And then I know we've had sequels and we've had everything, but I always come away from that movie going like, what happens then? Like, where does he go from there, or what? Where is she, or what's? Yeah,
but there's a
questions, but it answers at the same time, kind of.
Well, yeah, this is the end of that story, but yeah, there's definitely this sort of statement of these type of things will just continue to happen. Like, even if you hunt down this family, it's not just this family that one thing happened to them, that there's sort of this implication that part of America may have gone that way. And, you know, the rest of the world, I think that's the 70s were definitely the time where horror came home. Instead of it being fear of foreigners, it became fear of your neighbor. And what are people doing? And I think that's much scarier.
Yep. And I think things like that now are even more prevalent probably nowadays.
100%. Absolutely. But like you can see those films, they were coming out around after the time of the Vietnam War. That was a nation damaged. And I think that wound has continued since then, and those kind of prejudices people have. But I think that's what horror's always touched on, hasn't it? Really, like it's what are we afraid of? And more often than not, we kind of find in a lot of these films that what we're afraid of at the beginning turns out to be not what we should be afraid of, and it's actually something much closer to home, was where the danger really was. Yeah,
Yeah, that's true. So, I won't ask you your favorite horror movie because I feel like that's always a really hard question to answer on the spot like that. And a lot of us probably give the answer of like, well, you know what? It's impossible for me to pick one and it kind of changes based on my conversations. But what are some of your, I don't know, if you could think of maybe 3 or 4 movies off the top of your head that you would say are some of your favorites?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I'll probably go and shoot myself afterwards. I think that, like, beyond a doubt, Halloween is so iconic to me. And I know that's a straight up one. Suspiria, huge impact on me when I first saw it. I'm a big fan of Italian horror. So a lot of Argento stuff, Phenomena, I'm quite a big fan of as well. Cronenberg wise, the Brood, Videodrome, like really the Brood unsettled me. It still unsettles me. And I love a lot of his work. I think Videodrome is, in a world of social media, is still incredibly relevant. And let me think, like there's so many of them down there that I just love watching. I have to give a shout out to Zoltan Hound of Dracula. If you haven't seen it, guys, you gotta watch it. Razorback is a great fun film as well. Best giant killer pig film ever made. And what actually is a really, really good ghost film that a lot of people haven't seen is The Legend of Hell House. It's actually really worth checking out. It's just, again, it's another great film. Something we tried to do with Crone Wood, where they start straight away. The guys are arriving at the house in the opening scene, and it just really delivers on it. So that's a good one. If you can find it, that's definitely one to check out.
And would you say you have any? We kind of touched on it earlier. Like,
I have to say The Wicker Man as well. Actually, sorry, The Wicker Man is one of my favorite films. I absolutely adore it.
So much to the point where I was actually supposed to go last year, but I wanted to go to Thorpe Park just for the Wicker Man ride, just to kind of get into that whole thing.
I'd love to go.
Yeah, do you have any like guilty pleasure horror movies? Like, so let me see if I could give you like an example of what I mean. So like I love things like Urban Legend. I don't know if you remember that movie Valentine slasher movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but that 90s slashers kind of, or early 2000s slashers, like there's a lot of fun films there.
I like we spoke about before, I understand it like from maybe a movie making standpoint, there's a lot of problems and issues, but and like even things like the remake of House on Haunted Hill and stuff.
Actually, that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I recently got the Scream Factory collector's editions of those just because they have so many special features.
Yeah.
So I can go back and kind of dive into the behind the scenes and hear the commentaries and stuff. Have you got any movies like that you kind of find?
Yeah, well, I guess Zoltan probably falls into the guilty pleasure things. Pieces is a wonderful
I recently just bought the Arrow release of that. Actually.
Yeah, it's incredible. I've never seen it looking so good. Yeah. But yeah, like those kind of ones, definitely. I'm a big fan of kind of slashers in that way as well. Like I kind of would nearly watch any of the ones from particularly the sort of 80s period of it. Like Wrong Turn, I still have a lot of fun with Wrong Turn. Not the sequel so much, that they really drifted off for me, but any film that you can go along and just have a really good time with. Let me try and think of which other ones like that I probably should be ashamed of, but I haven't. Let's see, I love Lucio Fulci as well, so like I know people might consider some of his films like City of the Living Dead trashier, but I think they're art in their own right. I don't know. Yeah, like Giallos, I suppose they're definitely sort of guilty pleasures, the kind of more thrillery sort of Italian horrors. But there's something, it's like with slashers, there's something really appealing about something where you understand the formula and you're just kind of along for the ride. And so, you accept all these kind of tropes that are cheesy, but that's kind of what you're there for.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it kind of feels like maybe like somebody who's like a roller coaster enthusiast or something. I mean, I know they're all different per se, but you kind of know what you're getting when you go on.
Yeah, well, they go left, right, up and down, right?
Yeah. And it's like, I know exactly what I'm getting into, but I like Wrong Turn, for example, and I'm kind of excited to see what this new Wrong Turn is going to do.
Hopefully they do something decent with it. What I love with a horror film, because I used to watch horror films to get scared, and it's quite rare I get really scared of stuff nowadays. But like in my head, if I say to my wife, like, I'd love to watch a horror film tonight, I'm actually looking to sit down, and it's almost like a kind of a warm hug in a strangely violent film way.
Yep.
You know, I'm looking for that comfort factor. So I might be sticking on Friday 13th Part 6, Jason Lives. You know, that's sort of what I'm looking for. I want to kind of be able to chuckle and laugh, and I don't know, just enjoy yourself. I think people forget that that's what a lot of horror films are. It's just having a really good time.
And I don't think that gets appreciated enough, in the sense that I don't know why, but I don't know if you've ever seen a movie called, it's a Paul Walker movie called Roadkill.
Yeah, Roadkill, absolutely.
I actually, that was just something that popped into my head there, where there's times where I've had like maybe a bad week, or I just don't, maybe I'm sick or whatever, and like movies like that, and that's a more recent movie.
Yeah.
But I think it's really underappreciated how much of that there is in horror, and for fans of horror, how a lot of that stuff, maybe it's nostalgia, maybe it brings someone back a memory of where they were, or what, you know, like an experience in, say, the likes of Extravision, or
absolutely,
or when you were younger, and it kind of, like you said, I'm not necessarily putting it on to be scared anymore. It's just this, that it's a perfect explanation. It's like a warm hug.
It you know, like,
it's like a comfort blanket.
Yeah. Some people put on Sleepless in Seattle. I put on Zombie Flesh Eaters, you know?
Yeah. And it definitely, there's definitely something to that. And I had thought about that a lot. I was like, is that just something people say? And then when I really, really got into horror, I was like, now I get why. And for a while I was like, I can't even explain it. But just the way you said that there, with like a warm hug, that's exactly the kind of feeling that those movies give you.
Absolutely. And if you're with someone who doesn't appreciate that, they're the wrong person.
Yeah.
Well, they are for me anyway. It's always been a strong prerequisite. Like, I just couldn't live in a world where I couldn't sit down and watch a horror film.
Yeah, I know. I guess this kind of maybe question has already been answered then, but why horror, and what keeps you interested?
It's a really interesting question. I'd say the most honest answer, I remember reading an article somewhere about it, and it just kind of chimed at me that I think not everyone, but certainly me and a lot of people who come to horror probably come to it from a place where they were actually quite fearful themselves and afraid of things in the world. And horror was a way to be able to safely explore that, to be able to confront that fear of the unknown and of the darkness, and be able to kind of go, okay, I'm going to be able to look at this within that safety of your home or wherever you're watching it, and be able to kind of, I don't know, reason out what you're afraid of. And kind of, like, it sounds silly because I know a lot of horror films aren't necessarily very serious films, but it was about survival. It was about how you can overcome things. Watching people overcome these things and make it out the other end was definitely something that mattered to me. And I think that's why the films with characters you can actually kind of care a bit about really resonated the most with me, because that's what I wanted. Like, of course, we're there for the violence, we're there for the excitement, we're there for jumps and scares and all of that, and it's wonderful. But at the end of the day, what we're looking, well, for me, I'm looking for is someone who can take on this incredible task and come out the other side despite all the odds. And I find that really comforting.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of people that are probably maybe general fans, or like a mainstream fan, like we said earlier, with like places like Netflix bringing some of those shows maybe, or movies that before wouldn't have become so, you know, like you go on Netflix now and you see like a number one in Ireland right now or whatever.
Yes. Yeah.
I think sometimes as well, there's like mainstream people who mightn't be a horror fan that watch those things and don't realize that that's like the subconscious reason.
Yes.
That they get
absolutely.
invested, or they're into it.
Well, it took me years to even kind of come around, because like, yeah, I would have told you like 15 or 20 years ago that I just love scary movies, you know? Yeah, I think you get a bit more reflective, especially when you start making them yourself, or maybe even doing a podcast like this where you're discussing it a lot more. Yeah. You kind of become a bit more aware of, you know, geez, maybe there was kind of partly to do with that. Definitely, like, I would have been an anxious kid. I definitely awkward in social situations. And so there was something fantastic about that. And I kind of guess like a lot of these characters that we would have loved in these films were, you know, they were never the coolest person. They were never necessarily the hottest person or whatever it was. They were the kind of, they weren't like the complete weirdos, but they were peripheral people. And they become the center of the story. And the fact that they weren't central usually means that's why they're more likely to survive. And I guess we're all comforted by that.
Yeah, and it's funny. And even something like this, like me starting this this venture kind of, I won't say full-time, but a lot more consistently, maybe about a year ago. has definitely been like a form of therapy for me as well. Being able to connect with so many different people who love it as much as I do, or maybe more, and then just hear like someone like yourself who, and it's really refreshing as well to see you be so honest, because even probably myself and probably plenty of other people would maybe look at your Instagram or look at whatever and go, oh, this guy made Crone Wood and it became a thing and it's like everywhere and now it's out on, it's coming out in Ireland, and they would kind of look at it as maybe the 1% life. And to see you be like, yeah, well, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, and there was definitely
I think that's really important though, isn't it? Because like we do live in a world where it's very easy to paint all the positive things and to put up that fake side where everything is great. And I think it's important to celebrate the great things that go with it. So it's not about being negative, but it's a really cruel trick to play on other people and say like, oh yeah, the reason my film got out there was just because I was brilliant and you're not. That's not necessarily the case. There's always an element of skill, but there's always an element of luck as well. And I would hate the idea that anyone would achieve, something that they would have been very proud of, but after the fact, they kind of look back and say, yeah, but it's not this. Like if you made a film, you're like, yeah, but it wasn't as big a hit as Paranormal Activity. That's okay. You've got to do, when you do any of these things, I think you need to almost go down and write down at the beginning of like, what are those few things that would say to you that this is a success? And then afterwards look back at it, because even now I struggle with celebrating, the release coming out here, and it's such great stuff and it's great news and it's amazing it's getting a physical media release. But I struggle with that now. While if you told me 3 years ago that this is what would be happening and that I'd be talking to yourself and it'd be getting out there to thousands and thousands of people, I would have said, I give you my right arm for that. So I think it's really important for us to remember what those metrics were for us, not what other people tell us we should feel, but what you feel is actually a mark of success, and stick with that.
Yeah, 100%. And until, and I'll even speak on that at a lesser level, until you kind of maybe sit back and really take note of that, you're probably not going to do anything either or move forward. And I don't mean that in a move forward as in a sense of like, oh, I'm some guru who this or that. But for example, maybe a year and a half ago, I had spent probably 10 years going, I wish I could do this. I wish I could do a podcast, and even if nobody listened to it, I would be able to talk to these people and find out these things and just be happier. And because in my day-to-day life, I guess I didn't get to talk as much about those things, and maybe feeling like a bit of an outcast, and it's just a bit like, oh, there's nobody else like me, or nobody likes this as much as I do. Maybe I go on about it too much. Maybe I should just stop. And till you really sit down and go, okay, so I can't do it because everybody else tells me if you're not Joe Rogan, you're obviously shit. And there's no point. It's a waste of time. You're wasting your life. You're sad.
Yeah, if 10 million people aren't listening, you're not a success. Like, could you imagine if you give yourself those kind of metrics, like, you will never succeed, ever. And those guys didn't get there by aiming for that. They just did what they thought was good. And they consistently did it day after day. Like, that's what gets people where they're going. You know what I mean?
And like, even with your movie, and it's not like, I don't want anybody to think that I'm doing this because we're talking and I'm like kissing your arse or whatever. But like, you can feel that with Crone Wood. It doesn't feel like, and I hear that a lot, like where people go, oh, I'm making my Paranormal Activity, or I'm making my Blair Witch. No, I'm making my movie, and like, that's why I have a lot of respect for, say, somebody like Adam Green.
Absolutely.
Again, he reminds me of kind of that like Rob Zombie feel, where it's like, oh, I'm making an Adam Green movie. I'm not making, something to be, so I make $10 million and whatever, and I don't care if it's not my thing.
Yeah.
They're just making what feels true to them.
But that's it. And they're heavily influenced by lots of things, but yeah, it's still coming through them. They're filtering it through them with, you can tell when you're watching the films that there's a part of them in there. And I think that's what we should see in all things. Same with this podcast. It's about being authentic, If you can deliver that, I think people will enjoy it.
Yeah, and that was something that I struggled with, because I would listen to hundreds of podcasts and go, oh, okay, let me be this person, or let me be that person. And like, even someone like maybe Joe Rogan, I would look at him interview people like Rick Baker and Rob Zombie, and I would be like, how does he, I can tell he has no idea about this stuff, but how is he able to free flow? And then I would like overanalyze, like, how to talk to people properly. And because it's funny that you said earlier about like being anxious and stuff growing up. I would have been very like that, and not very sociable, like with a small group of friends, but I wouldn't like to reach out to anybody else outside the group, or I would be uncomfortable if there was people I didn't know around.
Yeah,
and kind of just
absolutely.
keep to myself. So this has been a really good learning experience in a way. Like this time probably a year ago, I probably would be sitting here right now, shaky voice, soaked in sweat, like freaking out, like spent a week going, oh, Mark's going to think I'm there's something wrong with me. I can't do this. I can't do that. And that's definitely something. And I get so many messages, and I can only imagine like when you go up the scale of, popularity or whatever, but I get so many messages of people like, oh, how do you do that? Or how do you, it's like, I feel exactly the same way that everybody does.
Yeah.
Even still.
Well, it's just you do it enough, you see, as you show up day after day, and that's where you kind of relax into it. It's really hard. I think people don't quite appreciate, especially I think talking on podcasts, same as like if you're speaking on camera, it takes a lot of time just to be able to sort of allow yourself just to be yourself. I think even the same with filmmaking, and that's why I'd say if I was to make another feature, it would be a little less heavily influenced by films that I love, just because I think you kind of have to go through that process of getting that out of your system too. You can't just kind of be smart enough just to cut through it. The only way you can do it is by physically going through the process yourself and evolving naturally and finding your feet. Because it's like someone can't tell you, here, put your feet there and you'll be fine. You've got to take that step, Yeah,
100%. And I think, I suppose in a way, without even realizing, I don't think people start things to be somebody else, but you'll definitely look at something and go, oh yeah, that thing or this thing. And like you said, the only real way to feel any of that out is to just do it and then let it take its course and go from there.
Absolutely. Honestly, the only thing you can do is be yourself. And the same, whether it's making a film or doing a podcast, you've got to do what you think is right, and you just got to hope that you can find the audience for it. But if you're faking it, people are going to smell it straight away.
Mm-hmm. So, second last question.
Go.
What's the future look like for you? Or is there, I know if there is, you probably can't talk outright, but can we expect some more movies, or what can we expect, or where are things going from here?
It's a really interesting question, because the truth is I don't know. Nothing would make me happier to make more films. Like there's 2 or 3 scripts here that I think would make excellent films. And again, got a little bit closer with some than others, but it's quite hard to get funding. And I don't know whether it's just the Irish environment or the fact that, I don't know, maybe people are trying to make a certain type of film at the moment, but I've struggled to get people interested in making a film that is just a really good time for a general audience. There kind of seems to be a sense that either has to be incredibly hardcore or else it has to be incredibly light, to kind of satisfy. And I think there's a big audience out there who actually just want to go and have a good time. Like they want to be scared, but they don't want to be completely disgusted. That's where I think the sweet spot is, and we're missing it because you don't see it very often. So I have the stories, and I guess the release of Crone Wood here will hopefully generate some interest, and we'll see. If I can, I absolutely would love to. As I said, I got a young kid here who I need to be able to take care of her as well. And that's a really hard balance to make, because before I had a family, I was very happy to sacrifice pretty much every minute of my day for film. It was just everything I lived and breathed. And now that's a little bit more divided. But yeah, I would love to think that there are more films to come. And certainly if the audience is there, that I would be the first in line to go out and do it all over again.
That's cool. So final question then.
Go.
A Mark Sheridan recommended horror movie, book, music, TV show. It can be anything as long as it's within the horror realm. Is there something that you have, let me see, either recently been enjoying, or just something that you would recommend that people check out other than Crone Wood?
Other than Crone Wood, yeah, check out Crone Wood. That's an interesting one. It's funny, I'm watching The Stand at the moment as it's popping up, and nice. As I adore that book, I've I there's a lot I like about this new one. I feel they jump around in time too much. I think they should take more time with it, but I think that's worth checking out. What have I really enjoyed lately? Give me a second on that.
I was just trying to think there for myself, and
yeah,
I watch so much stuff. It's and I feel really generic then, because I'll say something there's a UK company called 88 Films that released a I Know What You Did Last Summer, like a trilogy box set.
Did they?
And
that's
like,
actually one I've been looking forward to catching up with. I haven't watched any of them in a couple of years.
They brought out a box set, and it's actually really cool. The artwork is really cool. It comes with like posters and art cards and stuff. I think it's like £20 or £25 for the three of them on Blu-ray. And that's probably what I would say, just because it's the most recent thing I've kind of watched that I can remember.
Yeah, it's funny because like I used to say a lot, and I still do kind of keep on top. I haven't had a chance to check out Host yet. I'm curious to check that out.
That's very good.
Yeah,
it's so much buzz.
Yeah. I definitely want to check it because I've watched a number of ones that are kind of set in the sort of online environment, whether it's online windows or open windows or whatever the other ones are. But I want to check that out. It's not. Yeah, I've been watching more older stuff. Like, you're going.
No, I was just going to say not to knock them, but and like it was really inventive what they done. But I will say that I definitely feel like that they probably, some of it as well was striking at the right time.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I don't think it was because I had recommended this a while ago and I got some shit because people were like, "Oh, I've seen films like this before," and I was like, "No, I never said this was like a completely new idea. It's just the times we were in and just the whole thing." And it's 55 minutes. I mean, so it's not like you can't really give out to somebody for recommending something that's less than an hour.
I didn't realize it was that short.
Yeah.
Well, that's not a bad thing. I think like the right length for the story. Do you know what's funny? Because like I can't think of anything because I'm just rewatching it. I bought the crazily expensive 4K remaster of the Dawn of the Dead lately, so that's sort of what I've been watching. Nice. But when it comes to the people with those kind of attacks of like, I've seen this before and everything, it's a really weird thing that I hear people say because of course you've seen it before, but like, haven't you ever had a beer before? And is that the reason why you're not going to have a beer tonight because you've had a beer before? Like, I don't see that as a valid argument as to why this is not something I want to watch. Like, of course it's great if you see something that's like unlike anything you've ever seen before, but for me, the worst horror films these days are ones that are trying so hard to be something I haven't seen before that they're awful. Yes. Because there's probably a reason I haven't seen that before. I don't know, like I nowadays like to watch a film that I don't mind if I'm familiar with the concept, but it's just well done. That's what you want. I want my scares to be good. I want them to have suspense and tension. I don't want it just to be blunt force trauma. I want you to actually kind of make me a little bit tense before I get the reveal. And I want to have a good time. That's really what we're looking for.
Yeah, and that, you know what, that happens more often than I think people actually think about, where maybe something gets made because they think that, oh, this is going to be something you haven't seen before. Like, I recently rewatched the Jeepers Creepers trilogy, and I had never seen the third movie. Yes. And I know people give a lot of flack for the director for all the stuff he's involved in. Those first two movies, the first one especially, I love. And
I kind of like the second one.
Yeah, this is the thing. That's what I was going to say. I actually quite enjoy the second one.
The second one is really, like, that reminds me of, though, again, what I'm saying is that old school kind of horror thing of, it's a nice, simple conceit. You got this bus full of kids, it crashes off, and away we go with the thing. And like, where you're at straight away with the story. And they just do it pretty well. I was pleasantly surprised with that one. Of course, I get people's issues with Victor Salva and all the backstories of that, but I don't think that should preclude us from being able to talk about the films at all, especially because most of us saw those films before we really knew what was going on in the background.
And like, I had seen, I don't know if you've seen the third movie.
I did. I think it popped up on somewhere streaming wise. I can't actually remember anything was right. I remember being pretty unimpressed by it, but I can't remember why. Yeah,
and that just for me anyway, and I only seen that for the first time recently, and just from being such a big fan of that franchise, if you want to call it that, to have only seen it now. And I had seen a lot of people said, "Oh, if you like Jeepers Creepers, you're going to like it." Now, I personally didn't, because it felt a bit like he tried to give you Jeepers Creepers, but like completely reinvent it to the point where it was like, it's Jeepers Creepers like you've never seen it before.
Yes.
And I was like, wow, this is awful. There's a lot of choices here that, again, I know we're talking about some weird creature thing that flies around and hunts every 23 years. I know it's not really that believable. So I was going into it with that. I get that. And he drives this truck and whatever. But like, there was just some choices there. Like, he talks, and
when you expand the mythology, it's always dangerous. It's like when you go back to, I'm trying to think, I even say like the prequel kind of remake of The Thing, you know, there's just a danger. It's so hard because what makes those films work in the first place is the unknown. And the more you start filling in, it's diminishing returns. It's like, was it Hannibal Rising where, you know, we get to find like, you know, no, I don't need it, you know.
Yeah, and I get it. Like, I suppose maybe from a studio perspective or whatever, people are going, ooh, you know, and probably similar with things like the Blair Witch and stuff. You know, when you had Blair Witch 2.
Yeah. Which has its moments.
Yeah, and look, again, that's another one of those movies that I can watch and I kind of enjoy, but if you were to look at it from like a Blair Witch, maybe in a lore perspective, there was a lot of stuff that went on there, and like, even if you listen to the director talk about it, he's kind of like, this just became like well, Blair Witch was super popular and we're going to make it and I really don't care what it's going to be, or just so long as it's called Blair Witch 2.
I know, it's just funny, isn't it? Because that's Joe Berlinger, isn't it? Yeah, like, you know, some kind of monster, like amazing documentaries. Was the ones in Memphis? What were the ones about the kids who got killed that he did? I can't remember. Really powerful documentaries. And yeah, like, what a strange and different film. I get the feeling from that commentary that there was definitely a bit of a different film he wanted to make there. I'm not sure actually if it would have been that much better. But it's a really tricky thing with those franchises. You know, same with was Kieran Foy did Sinister 2. You know, like, that's a challenge for any director where you go into a franchise and you're kind of handed a script that you just sort of have to work with. You know, there's certain trade-offs with that. But that said, like, if someone was to offer me a franchise and say, would you like a shot at this? Like, I think it'd be very hard for any of us to say no. Even if part of you knows that it's very hard to come out of this well. There's just this curiosity, desire to be part of that world. I don't know.
I think that happens a lot. Well, I appreciate the time, Mark. I know we're
great talking to you, man.
Yeah, it's cool. I appreciate you taking the time out, and I know you're probably up the walls, and then just the way things are at the minute as well.
It's it's a strange time, but you know, making the most of it though. At the same time, I'm going to spend more time with my kid than I ever would have if I'd been working in a normal environment. So trying to see the positive sides of these things.
This is true. So for everybody listening, I'll have all of Mark's links below. So you'll be able to pick up Crone Wood on DVD in Asda and Tesco.
And then online and all the major streaming places, I think.
Okay, so YouTube, Amazon,
YouTube, Amazon, Sky Store, Amazon Prime, wherever that, iTunes, all of that.
And it's already available. I had double checked this because I had watched it on Amazon US originally. It's still available there to rent. I think it's $4.99, and to buy it's $12. I want to say.
Okay, gotcha.
And I'm not sure other than that. That's where I watched it. So if anyone's listening from the States,
it's North America, Canada, most of South America, Australia, definitely across pretty much all of Europe, China and Japan. So you should be able to. Most places should be able to find it. And if not, I'm sure there are ways and means that you can find it.
There is, I just gave away one of them.
Anyway, the most important thing to me is that people get the chance to watch it, and I really hope you enjoy the film.
Yeah, thanks for talking, Mark.
Cheers, mate. It was great talking to you.
Support First Class Horror on Patreon for as little as $1. Can't get enough of the horror? Carve yourself a deal from official merchandise, only on Teespring. Join us on all social media at First Class Horror. We have such sights to show you.